So yeah, good morning. Great to see you all back. Really good to see you. Just a couple of things while we're getting people in from the waiting room to say that, I don't know if you had a chance yesterday to play around with the Zoom settings, but you can play around with how you view things, whether you're viewing things where it's spotlighted and you really, spotlighting just means that you see the big picture of the person who is talking, or whether you can see the whole gallery view and see all of the other people who are online with us here in the group. But yeah, if you do want to play with the views and work out what works best for you, then usually it's sort of up at the top, there's a little button that says view, and there's different options there about speaker view or gallery view, and hopefully you can play around with that and work out what works best for you. We've also, again, got the live transcript running. It is a automated thing, and it picks up different voices differently, and sometimes it's better than it is at other times. If it's useful for you, then hopefully those captions are playing on the bottom of your screen. If not, usually down the bottom of Zoom, you can see a button that says live transcript, and you can hide the subtitles or you can choose to see the subtitles, and it's up to you. Whatever works best for you in terms of being able to follow, being able to hear, being able to understand what's going on. So I think that's the main things I need to say on Zoom. The other thing I need to remind people of actually is renaming yourself. Sometimes it doesn't hold over from the meeting before. So you should be able to see on your own picture how your name is being presented.
Yeah, I've just changed mine because I just realised from last night. Sorry.
It's all right. Look, it happens. And, some of us, who are on lots of Zoom calls, we pop in with all different sorts of versions of what we call ourselves, depending on what context we're in. But I would encourage people to try and just have their first name or what they would like people to call them when they're having a discussion. And it looks like, as a quick scan through, most people have managed to do that. And the support team, if you have any problems with either renaming yourself or anything else as we go through the session, then, use the chat function. The chat function will take you straight to the support team. We've got Rebecca and Charlotte there, whose whole role is to help with anything that's not working very well for you. So please, if you are struggling with anything, do try and use the chat, or you know how to contact them via email or text as well. And they are there. Their whole role is really to help make it as easy for you and make the session work for you. So if there are things that are not working, do use the chat, do get in touch, do ask for some help, and we will do what we can. So I suppose that looks like we've got pretty much, I think, everyone in now. So I will start by just sharing briefly what we're going to be doing today. So before I share I will share my screen actually. So, we're in the wrong place. Hang on. Again, like I don't do this all the time. So, all right, I will now share my screen just for a very quick sort of catch up of where we're at. So again, as you know, this is day two of the Citizens Assembly about democracy.
We're not, oh, there it is. Sorry, I was just going to tell you we weren't seeing your screen, but we do now.
We do, yeah? Great, thank you, Jo. Citizens Assembly on Democracy in the UK, day two. So, as we said yesterday, the Citizens Assembly on Democracy in the UK has really been brought together to consider this big question, and it is a big question, as we really opened up yesterday about how should democracy in the UK work. And we started digging into this yesterday by thinking about, well, what do we like? What do we dislike about how our democracy is working around us at the moment? What are some of the features that actually should underpin or should be really a vital part of a good democracy? And those are the questions we're going to... Sorry? Those are the questions we're going to be really continuing on with today about what are the features, what are the principles and the values that should underpin a good democracy. So before we start exploring that today, I'm just going to give you a bit of a reminder about the conversation guidelines that you put forward and agreed yesterday. These are the ones we put forward as a starter, which everyone seemed to think were a good starter point for our conversations. That one voice at a time, everyone actually does have the right to speak and be listened to. So in our groups, we try and really make sure everyone has a chance to be heard. We can disagree, and we probably will, but hopefully we can do that in a way that's not disagreeable. The step up, step back, if you're aware that you tend to be the one who talks a lot, make sure you step back a little to give space. It's not about not saying anything, but step back enough to let other people be heard. And actually, if you are someone who's a bit quieter, try and take the opportunity to step up, because what you have to say is really important. The respecting that confidentiality and not identifying people outside, that what's said in the Zoom room stays in the Zoom room, and that tech problems will probably happen. And we saw that yesterday afternoon. We saw that from our side yesterday afternoon. You were all patient and worked with us, and I hope you'll be the same with each other when things do happen. And then the range of conversation guidelines that were proposed by all the different groups. I'm not going to read them all out to you, but they're up there so you can have a look. And I think the big thing that comes through from a lot of them is that, you're all here and you all do have different personalities, backgrounds, contexts, politics, attitudes, beliefs, all of those things. And it hopefully will be an exciting opportunity to listen to different people, hear different perspectives, and maybe find something new that you haven't thought about before. So, as we were in the groups at the end of yesterday afternoon, most of the groups, well, what we were saying is we're going to have a little bit of feedback from what happened in the groups, what you guys were discussing, some of the key sort of priorities there about, or just things that felt like they seemed important or most important for being part of a good democracy. Now, as we said before, so a number of groups or most of the groups have actually identified someone who's going to feed back. Hopefully those people are here and ready and looking forward to actually sharing some of the discussion with them. I know a number of facilitators have said they'd sort of help with providing back notes to remember what happened last time. So we're going to use the chat for that as well. So the facilitators, when the different groups come around, can share some reminder notes in the chat if that's helpful. If it's helpful, you can ask your facilitator to share on the screen the things they were looking for, or you can just talk from your own notes or your own memory from what you were prioritizing and discussing yesterday. Just that reminder that these sessions where we're in a big group are all recorded. So the recordings are going up on the Constitution Unit website as part of the record of this project. If for any reason you don't want to appear in that video, and you would only appear if you're feeding back, if for any reason you don't want to appear in the video, you can either turn your camera off or say, actually at that point, I've changed my mind, the facilitator can take over for you, facilitator from your group. But it'd be great to actually hear from from members directly, because actually this is what's important. This is what we really want to hear, your views of what's important to you, and your views of what was important in your group's discussion yesterday collectively. So we're going to start this now. We're going to really start hearing some feedback from the different groups. So we're asking each group to just do one or two of the features from things we were discussing yesterday that they identified as the most important features of a good democracy, or the type of democracy that they would want to live in. And we just want, what was the features really, and a sentence or two of why. And I am going to have to keep people quite to time just to make sure that we have time for the discussions that are going to be happening later. So I am going to start with group one, and I understand Colin had volunteered to do a little bit of sort of presenting back the key conclusion from their group about what was the most important feature and what, and why. So Colin, are you there?
I am indeed. I was the one that didn't step back quickly enough. So we decided that, or the group decided that the two most important ones in the list were I, who holds power is decided by free and fair elections, and K, all people are treated equally. So the general consensus of opinion was that we all agreed that who holds power must be decided by free and fair elections. But at the moment, the current system that we have is very flawed. It isn't representative and it isn't transparent. The general view was that once a government gets in, it pretty much does what it likes. And then towards the end of its tenure, it will suddenly throw a couple of sweeteners into the pot to try and get people to vote for it again. So they're not honest and they're not reliable. So moving on to K, all people are treated equally. There was some concern that prisoners aren't given the vote. I think the general consensus again was that they've removed themselves from society by acts against society, and that is why, at least in England, they're disenfranchised. And there was also an argument that under 18s aren't included, which in some countries they are. That kind of split the group to some degree. Some really did think that 16-year-olds should be given the vote. The other view was that 18 is the age of consent in this country, and that the adults effectively rule the show. But there was also a view expressed that some 18-year-olds feel disenfranchised. Okay.
No, look, thank you. Really, really clear summary there of the key points that were coming up with your group. And I'm sure there was a lot behind those conversations, but really interesting points there. Thank you very much, Colin. So I'm going to move on to group two now. And I think we've got Karen and Paul who are going to feedback. I'm not sure who's going to go first, but I'm going to call on Karen. We've popped you up, so let's go.
Yes, thank you. So in our group, we chose D. So issues are given serious consideration before decisions are made. So we thought this would be kind of the most, to get a thorough job, to kind of look at the pros and cons of a decision, and hopefully it would lead to sort of better outcomes by doing that. But then we did recognise that the downside could be the time it takes if you don't do that, and also if you don't do that and you sort of rush into things, then you could have unintended consequences later down the line. I think it might cost more time and more money, so it's almost better to invest up front and do the due diligence almost. So we kind of thought it was a bit of a trade-off between speed and quality.
No, I could see that. I definitely see that trade-off.
Yes. And it was interesting. Some of our group thought, actually, don't they do that anyway? Isn't everything given serious consideration? Which I guess you'd like to think so, but then I guess there's this trade-off as well. And also then we also thought if maybe people do know the trade-offs, but they just hope it doesn't happen, or maybe just carry on anyway and hope for the best type thing. So I think that was the main thing. And then one way as a bit of a mitigation could be to trial, you know, to do a trial and see whether that's successful, which I think perhaps that does happen to a point.
Yeah, lots of that sort of trialing something in small
Before.
areas sometimes, but yeah, that level of, you know, decisions that are really going to impact on people have to be taken seriously and thought through.
Seriously.
And as you said, the otherwise unintended consequences popping up.
Popping up. So yes, we thought it would be a good thing to do. Thorough job, you know, you can better outcome hopefully, but yeah, there is that dilemma in the time and money factor, and yeah, so that was us.
Great, thanks Karen. And Paul, you talking about the second one?
Yes, that's correct. Good morning. The other value that we picked was J, which is that people should accept the outcome of elections, etc. And during discussions, we sort of stressed that it's important to accept it even if you disagree, and for various reasons, which I'll try and summarize now. Is you have to make the best of a decision and go forward, because looking back and refighting old battles just isn't going to get anyone anywhere. You know, so no matter what you think, you have to accept that is democracy, really. An election has to have an outcome. Otherwise, it's pointless having an election. You just go around in a decreasing circle. And even if you disagree, it's the majority should decide. Again, that is democracy. And finally, we sort of touched on a very sore subject of like Brexit, and the divisiveness of that has caused quite a bit of intolerance of other people's views in our society. And if you look across to America, you can see the stresses that intolerance cause, especially, and this is very important really, if the intolerance is driven from the top, from the leadership. And I think hopefully that's something we can avoid in our democracy. Thank you.
No, thanks, Paul. I think, you know, as you've highlighted there, the Brexit referendum clearly is stuck in a lot of people's mind as being one of those, like, you know, once a vote happens, you know, how, like, the decisiveness of that and the tensions around that absolutely highlighted there. Thank you. I'm going to go to group 3 now. So I think we've got Albert. Albert from group 3.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for having me down. Yeah, we went through with Janet yesterday. Hopefully, I've re-summarised some of our points that we made yesterday, and I hope I do them justice. So our first one was actually A, that those in power can be voted out if they do a poor job. We've found that a lot of the strengths in democracy come from this as a foundation. We find that it's a great benefit as it exists as a penalty to those in power. If they've promised something and they've not lived up to those expectations, they can expect the public to take it negatively and vote them out. I had a personal experience with it in that my first opportunity to vote, I based my vote on one policy alone, that university tuition fees would be reduced to 0. The party I voted for got into power and the complete opposite happened. Fees were raised to £9,000 a year. Next time round, I had the opportunity to vote them out. It's worth noting that this, although it's really important, it does have its downsides, that if you're shaking things up too often, it can impact progress. So if there's something that's very long term, that will take a while to get into a place, and that party's taken out before they have an opportunity to finish, it can backtrack progress, depending on what that might be. Our second point was G, that people in public life are honest and trustworthy. For as long as we could all remember, we've had politicians acting corruptly or hypocritically. I'd highlight Matt Hancock, say no more. One of our members wanted to say that from her personal experience, she's seen that regularly making and breaking promises is a slippery slope to the source of corruption seen in third world countries, where people in power line the pockets of their friends and their own, disadvantaging the very people that voted them in. We found that people have been deceitful or dishonest in their private lives. It makes us ask why we should trust them in the public space. And we really need to be able to trust our politicians to make the right decisions. And we find that these characters, they have to prove their integrity through their actions. Some things we thought with the right people in place shouldn't even need to be debated. We highlighted the example of the vote last summer on whether to feed disadvantaged children through the summer holidays. Should this have even been a question? And in order for us to feel like we're being represented properly, we have to look at politicians when their private lives seem questionable, but to the public they claim to be saintly. This sort of flexibility in their character can make them hard to understand and unrelatable to the general public.
Great. No, sounds like a really good summary of the sort of key points that are coming out for your group. And I like the couple of little examples in there as well. Thank you very much, Albert.
Thanks very much. I'm
going to come to group 4 from yesterday now. So I think we've got Cass.
Morning.
Hiya.
So our group felt that G was the overriding. I think the majority, most of us voted for G being the top. So that was people in public life are honest and trustworthy. So a bit like Albert has said, we felt that if there is no trust, then there really is nothing to work on. We're trusting them with our votes, policies, manifestos, our futures, our children's futures. So yeah, it's pretty much been summed up in what Albert was just saying, really. The second one that we felt sort of quite strongly about was those in power could be voted out if they do a poor job. Okay. We felt that the term poor job was subjective. It can be influenced by opinions, tastes and personal feelings. So what one person sees as being a poor job, somebody else might see as they're doing a great job. Depending on whether they've been voted in by them, whether they agree with their policies, whether they've come through with policies that you don't agree with, but somebody else does. So we did feel that that was quite subjective. But we also felt that there was a link between G and A. We felt that without the trust and the honesty, then, you know, how can, when then A was, you know, it's not there, is it? If you haven't got the trust, then that poor job, is that trustworthy and honesty? Is that why they're doing a poor job? Or, you know, so it was quite subjective, really.
Yeah, but definitely some links between the two of them as to how they play out in reality. All right, thanks, Kath. That was great. Group 5 now, we're going to come, I think we've got Adrian.
So there was a general consensus around two main ones, really. We kind of ran out of time and there was a lot of discussion, but in no particular order.
Okay.
We decided that one of the main values was that those in power are able to deliver on their manifesto. As that is why the reasons they were elected. And if those in power don't deliver on the manifesto pledges, it can have a real impact on those sectors of the community who were relying on those pledges and gave the vote. The other one, which was an important one to us all, was that people in public life should be honest and that they should be honest and trustworthy. I think from everybody's experience on the group, is that this isn't the reality at all, and in living memory, there's some of us it never has been, like in any government, like in our lives, and that the values of honesty, sort of thing, and trust and integrity, are really the core values of democracy, the kind of like wellspring from which everything else flows.
Okay. Now look, it sounds like, that value of sort of trust and having the ability to trust the people who are making decisions on our behalf has come up in a number of the groups. So yeah, really good to hear that one coming up from you, Adrian. Thank you very much. And again, there is this whole question about all of these things could be important, but it's about digging down into where are the ones that we really want to pay attention to, focus on, and start digging into what it means in reality. So Andy, I know your group. So Andy, do you want to just feedback on behalf of your group?
I was nominated by our group. So our top priority with 4 votes was A, that those in power can be voted out if they do a poor job. And our group thought that that's important so you don't get stuck with someone, with a politician or a party that's incompetent. And it's important for politicians and parties to know that they can be removed, as it's an incentive for them to do the job well.
Okay.
There was also the point that everybody in society in their jobs are held accountable. So politicians must have that too. So the level of accountability should reflect the rest of society, and that would improve trustworthiness. Second priority, we had a tie of D and E, but as E hasn't come up yet, I'll read that one out. So people have the same influence on decision making, whatever their background, and they thought that this is good because you get more balanced views from different people, and that in order for this to really happen well, that we need to change current social factors. For example, the current government is very much Eton based, and so we need to improve education in politics in our education system. A lot of them felt that a lot of our group felt that at school they weren't taught politics. So it's important that everybody has the same level of understanding. And other social factors like poverty play into that is making E less possible. So yeah, understand who they're voting for, basically.
No, thanks, Andy. That's good. And like I know lots of the groups talked about lots of the different ones. We've asked you to pick 2, but it's good to get a good range of the ones and why they were important for different people. Group 7, I think we've got Margaret, who's agreed to feedback. You there, Margaret?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, this mute button's got me going. Basically, what I said yesterday, the trust and honesty. I don't have a hard time with that, because they say this, and you're going, yeah, I like that, and then they get in office, and I know it's a hard job, but then you're going, well, what happens to this? What about what you said? And it's very disheartening to me. It's like listening to a boyfriend cheating on you. Kind of, you know what I mean? It's like,
absolutely. I think it's great. I think it's a great analogy.
But you said you weren't going to do this no more, and look at you, So it's kind of a game to me that they play with us, which is very disappointing. And that's it, basically.
Okay, so yeah, the trust and honesty again, and just how can people really put their faith in what am I trying to say? Be confident that the right decision's being made when there is this sense of, but we just don't really trust you.
I have one thing to add while you're here. That 18-year-old with the voting on the 18. When I was 18, which was a long, long time ago, I didn't know much about politics, wasn't interested in it. So I voted who my dad told me to vote for. So it's interesting. I would agree for younger children, like 16, but it's like you're more interested in other things. You don't really listen to the news like you do now.
Yeah, maybe not. And I'm sure you're not going to be the only one whose first time they voted for whoever their parents,
I didn't know nothing about it. I did, I was more interested in the pub, so,
All right. Thank you very much, Margaret. I'm going to move on to group 8 now. Now, Latoya's group, I know there was a few sort of tech challenges in your group, and I'm not sure if you actually got the chance to get to decide someone to feedback. So I'm going to invite Latoya, but if anybody else from that group particularly wants to to add anything, do join us.
Good morning, everyone. And yes, as Kayla said, if anyone from my group in the afternoon yesterday would like to chip in on this feedback, that would be great. So we decided on our top 3 features, and we did that by going to a vote. The outstanding, the 2 top outstanding features was A, those in power can be voted out if they do a poor job, and C, which was those in power are able to deliver on their manifesto pledges. We then had a tie between K.
Just hear about the first 2, that'll be fine.
Right, okay. So yeah, with the first one, we felt it was really important that people had an opportunity to say when things were not going as they should do, or when the party or the government wasn't working for them. So we felt that it's really important that those in power can be voted out if they do a poor job. But we also noted that in between election cycles, which can be and is regularly kind of corrupted and manipulated by whoever is in government, there's no mechanism for getting rid of people if they're doing a poor job. We only have general elections, and that seems to be slightly flawed. And then C, those in power are able to deliver on their manifesto pledges. We didn't get a chance to prioritise, put a reason why for that. So I'll just quickly go to K, which is what we eventually came to. One of our speakers came in to help us work through it. All people are treated equally. And that felt like a founding principle, which fed into many of the other features. So that's what we prioritised.
Okay, look, thank you, Latoya. I'm assuming from the rest of the group, because no one's sort of jumped up, that you think she's done a good job of feeding back on your behalf. So thank you very much. I'm going to go to group 9 now, which is, I think we've got Ross, who was going to feed back.
Yep. Hi, morning everyone. We picked in the end C and E, which we thought were most important. So I'll start with C, that those in power are able to deliver on their manifesto promises. So we want those in power to be accountable to what they have promised when they were getting elected, and to make sure there aren't any hidden agendas or empty promises. But on the flip side of that, we also want those in power to have the ability to put forward actions and policies without any undue barriers. So they've got the resources to be able to put their manifestos in place. And then E, people have the same influence on decision making regardless of their backgrounds. So we dislike that some groups such as billionaires, celebrities, members of the House of Lords have a far greater influence than other people, and we believe that there should be equal opportunities for all regardless of profession, background, gender or race. And that was really the summary of our discussion.
No, that's great. Thank you very much, Ross. And definitely picking up on that idea of like where, what gives people more influence than others, and whether it's money or, power or celebrity, is that fair or reasonable?
And that's what, that was quite strongly that came from our group is we don't think that's fair at all. We don't think that if you got born into money or born into hereditary title, that you shouldn't have just as much influence as Joe who goes to work and works 50 hours a week. You know what I mean? Everyone should have the same influence.
No, thanks very much, Ross. That came across really clearly. Thank you. I'm going to group 10 now, and I think we've got Graham.
Morning.
Hiya.
Similar to the last group, a lot of our conversations revolved around this idea of being heard. H and K sort of together, this principle that everyone should be treated equally and that people have the right to express their opinions. And we sort of said that similar to the last group, the background is still really important to decide if you are listened to. And lots of people are excluded from power. we talked about this idea that many of the people in power lack empathy for the people that they leave out of the conversation, because they've never moved in those circles, they've never encountered those people or had to live those lives, and the people are often lumped together. So, you know, you might live on a council estate and there might be bad people on the council estate, but equally there are many people that work really hard and have, you know, very valid opinions. So that was H and K. Linked to that was E, with this idea that power or money allowed you a bigger voice, similar to some of the other groups, and that government doesn't kind of go out of its way to listen to people without, you know, without kind of the access. People are often put off by the language in which conversations are framed, and it doesn't feel that, you know, almost feels designed to exclude a lot of people from the debate. There's no attempt to communicate or bring it to a level that somebody who's not interested in politics might be able to access. And then that also led us to B, because often the reasons behind decisions, like, these are difficult decisions, they're not clear cut. If they were, we'd all agree. And so the ability to kind of share those the reasons for those decisions in an accessible way, rather than, you know, making that process more transparent rather than hiding them away, you know, what was the argument this was based on, rather than was this based on a conversation, you know, with a millionaire or whatever. So I think, yeah, our sort of overall conclusion was a way that finding a way to genuinely hear a wider range of voices would make.
Okay, thanks a lot, Graham. And as you've highlighted there, like, these things are not, like, these elements that we're giving you to sort of start thinking about yesterday, it's not about picking one. You know, we've asked you to have feedback on one or two, but actually the interrelation between them all are the types of features that are going to start building or start thinking about what is good democracy. Finally, we come to the last group. I think we've got Matt, and I know you're like coming up last, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what your group was talking about as well. We've heard from everyone now.
Hi everybody. So we cheated slightly and added one to the board yesterday, which became our option. So it was a bit of a merger of E and F, but we felt it was important to have an informed voter base where all take part actively, regardless of their background. So it was felt that it was key to ensure that the voter base is as broad and diverse as possible and accurately reflects the makeup of the UK. We felt that if people feel like the electorate is an accurate reflection of the society that we live in, then there would potentially be better buy-in, or at least acceptance of decisions made by governing parties. And it was also felt that if people have a better understanding of the democratic process, systems and institutions, that would help increase the diversity of people who can see themselves in those positions of power, and ultimately lead to better representation of the diversity that we have across the UK in our democratic institutions. And then in second place, we had a bit of a tie between A and B. So I'll just talk through A, which was around people can be voted out if they do a poor job. So it was felt that there was a need for a mechanism to hold elected officials to account. It reinforces the fact that we, the people, have the ultimate power, and it encourages MPs to listen to the electorate if they are displeased with decisions that are being made.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. And I really, that idea, I like the fact that your group added one, but this idea of that it's not just about participation, but actually that informed participation that you highlighted there is really important. Great. I hope you've all enjoyed I definitely have. I hope you've all enjoyed hearing back from some of the other groups and the sort of flavor of the conversations that were going on. We're going to put you into your breakout rooms now for just about 10 minutes, just to have a bit of a sort of check-in before we start moving on to the next stage of evidence. But most of you are going to be in the same breakout groups that you were in yesterday afternoon. We've done a little bit overnight to kind of balance up. There were a few because a couple of people weren't able to make it, just to make sure some groups weren't really small and some groups were bigger. So one or two of you will be moving between groups from where you were yesterday, but you'll have a chance to check in, say hi, see who you're going to be working with for the rest of the morning. So we'll open up the breakout rooms. Good to see everyone again. I know that was only a quick little conversation in your groups, but really just to sort of check in for the morning, just to sort of see that everyone's here and have a little reflection on what we've all just heard. So what we are moving on to now is some more evidence. And I'm going to hear from a number of speakers, and these ones are actually, they're pre-recorded videos. So the people have pre-recorded a message to you as the Assembly members. And unlike most of the speakers we heard from yesterday, most of the speakers yesterday were sort of providing a kind of more neutral, a more sort of balanced view of just what the situation is, or some things that they would encourage you to think about, some things that they were, encouraging you to open up these questions. The speakers we're going to hear from shortly are very much what we're calling advocates, okay? So they've been invited to actually come and give their perspective on what should or could happen, very much arguing for what their perspective is of what our democracy should be like. And look, there are clearly many, many varied and possible viewpoints in relation to this. And without being here for today, tomorrow, the next day, we couldn't possibly cover all of those different perspectives. What we've tried to do with the people that have been invited today is give a range, give a diverse range of different perspectives on democracy and some of the big sort of political questions of what our democracy should look like. So again, just to say, it's not about picking one and going with their view. It's about thinking, well, what are the types of issues they're bringing up, and what then resonates or makes sense and feels important in terms of how you think about what is important in democracy. So again, we're going to hear from a number. I'll hand over to Alan in a minute to start introducing the videos, but do take some time in between each of the speakers just to make some notes, identify some questions, think about what stuck with you from each of the presentations, whether it's something you agree with or whether it's something you disagree with. So over to you, Alan, to start us off with the panel.
Great, thanks so much, Kayla. Yeah, so we have 5 different people here who've thought a lot about democracy and have very different views of how a democracy should work. We've got their videos, each video, so they last from between 4 minutes and up to about 8 minutes, so they're a bit varied in how long they are. Don't worry if you don't manage to absorb everything that they say. I've watched these videos 3 or 4 times now myself, and I find every time I watch them, I actually notice more things that I hadn't picked up on previously. So we're going to play the videos now, but there's also going to, we'll put them up on our website after the weekend as well, and you'll be able to listen through again after the weekend, between now and the next weekend. And just one other thing that I should mention, we have subtitles on these. So if you've been using the automatic transcription, you might want to switch that off so that you don't have 2 different versions of text on your screen at once. This is not automated subtitles, so hopefully they're reasonably accurate this time. So the first speaker that we're going to hear from is Xiaomi Chakrabati. And she's a member of the House of Lords representing the Labour Party, but she's also a human rights lawyer and a human rights campaigner, and she's been in that space for many, many years. And I guess it's perhaps mainly from that perspective that she's speaking here. So she's focusing very much on the importance of rules in democracy, rules that protect human rights and rules that limit what those in power can do. And she argues that we need to think about how to ensure that those rules are followed. So these are themes, she'll say some really interesting things about this. These are themes that we will get into a lot more later on in the assembly. So this is a bit of a kind of opening taster on those sorts of issues now. So Juliet, we're ready to play Xiaomi Chakrabati.
Okay, can we see that?
We can.
Awesome.
Greetings to all the participants of the Citizens' Assembly on Democracy. Yours is such important work. My name is Shami Chakrabati. I'm a lawyer, a human rights campaigner, and a Labour peer. But I suppose my most formative experience of the coalface of our working democracy came when I started work as a government lawyer over 25 years ago. I think that democracy matters because we all do. And other systems of government inevitably lead to more and more wealth and influence concentrating in fewer and fewer hands, and therefore to gross abuses of that power. So I think that democracies, however imperfect, are the best systems for protecting human dignity and human rights. Conversely, fundamental rights and freedoms are a vital protection for preventing today's democracy from descending into tyranny tomorrow. If, for example, a government were to shut down free speech and peaceful dissent, or to begin to interfere with fair elections and so on. But whether or not you agree with me about the vital importance of human rights, I'd like to suggest that there are no human rights, there's no democracy, or even pretty basic civilization without the rule of law. That's what prevents people from raping, robbing, killing, or even cheating and exploiting each other. And that must include law that binds those who govern. I'm throwing in to your deliberations the idea that whatever form of democracy you prefer, and whatever reforms to our current systems you might suggest, there have to be rules of the game. And it's important to think about those rules, how they're to be enforced, who are the referees. So, for example, if government contracts should be awarded in open competition and not as favours to ministers and their friends, how is that ensured? By senior civil servants, a free press, Parliament, or the courts? If it's ultimately the courts, who will bring the proceedings and who will pay for them? Are civil or criminal sanctions appropriate? When should ministers become individually liable as well as collectively responsible? The same sorts of questions arise in relation to every single working part of any democracy that we might design. So I urge you, of course, to think about how our systems and cultures might be improved, but also to think about safeguards for when they're abused or when they otherwise fail. Do you currently feel you have sufficient access to the present rule book, let alone access to power or access to justice? Contrary to what some would suggest, democracy, even in the UK, is still quite young. All women have only had the vote for less than 100 years, the centenary is in 7 years' time. The franchise was extended to 18 to 21-year-olds only 52 years ago in 1969. So even our imperfect democracy, like all our rights and freedoms, was hard won against considerable resistance at every turn from those who jealously guarded their monopoly of power. I hope you enjoy your deliberations as well as finding them stimulating and worthwhile. And I really look forward to reading and hearing about your results.
So we're just going to take that 1 minute of quiet time now, just to sort of reflect and take any kind of notes or any thoughts that have stuck up from what you've heard there.
Can I speak, please?
well, it is that quiet time for reflection. If there's a specific question, Catherine, yes, so I guess.
Tyranny happened in Northern Ireland years ago.
This is probably it's probably something that we need to take back into the breakout groups. We can come and pick up there because we're hearing from a range of different speakers now. So we'll just give people that moment to just reflect on what they've heard, and we'll be able to pick up the discussions when we're in the breakout groups.
So you've had a little bit of a chance there to reflect on what you heard from Xiaomi Chakrabati. Now we'll go on to our second video, and the second video is from Claire Fox, who's a journalist and the director of the Academy of Ideas, which is a think tank that's committed to hosting free and open public debates. She was also briefly a member of the European Parliament for the Brexit Party, and now she's a member of the House of Lords. And she argues that in a democracy, we must trust voters. And she's actually quite skeptical of citizens' assemblies and of some of the ideas that came from some of the discussions this morning around the idea that we need to have more informed voters, more education in politics. So some really interesting ideas there. I should say that she frames a lot of her argument around Brexit and her experiences as a Leave voter. And Paul from Group 2 this morning mentioned that Brexit's been very divisive. So it's really easy for a lot of us to just assume that people on our side of that debate are right and the people on the other side are wrong. But just remember that conversation guideline that you came up with yesterday about being open-minded. So I'd just like to encourage, if you're a Remainer, then do listen to Claire and think seriously about what she's saying. And of course, also if you're a Leaver, then again, reflect seriously and don't assume that she's right. So Claire's video is a bit longer than the others, but I think it's really interesting and says some different things. So well worth listening to in full. So Juliet, over to Claire's video.
Just to introduce myself, I'm Claire Fox. I'm the director of the Academy of Ideas, and recently I was made a member of the House of Lords. So for just under a year now, I've also am known as Baroness Fox of Buckley. I'm only telling you that because it relates to the whole issue of democracy. So first of all, hello to everyone, and I'm looking forward to being there in person at some later stage in your gathering. I've been asked to just reflect for 5 minutes on a few thoughts on democracy, and I'm not going to, I have no notes, so this is a little spontaneous and a bit rough and ready, but I hope it'll give you a slightly different perspective. There's actually a myriad initiatives that have grown up in the last 5 years particularly, saying we need to revise, improve, reform democracy. And the first thing I'd say is, rather than that reflecting a lively democratic spirit of our time, sadly I think it reflects a growing disillusion with democracy. And we saw that very evidently in the aftermath of the Brexit vote in 2016 after the referendum where we decided to leave the European Union. And also it was a debate that started in relation to the election of Donald Trump in America, and also the growth of what's known as populist movements around Europe. And there then started to be a discussion about how it was that those votes ever happened. And the conclusion was that somehow the voters have got it wrong. And particularly familiar with the UK situation, because I voted Leave myself, to leave the EU. There was an extraordinary backlash against the voters, particularly from the establishment, but more broadly from commentators in the media, from all sorts of well-meaning people who voted Remain, who assumed that the reason why people had voted to leave the EU was because they were ill-informed, misinformed, duped, got at by Russian bots, had seen the side of a bus and that was sufficient to make them do something completely irrational. And there was even a discussion about how people who voted to leave the EU were noteworthy. It was noteworthy that they weren't well qualified academically. And we had a serious conversation still going on about how we've got to improve the education of the electorate. That to me is a completely contemptuous anti-democratic strand of debate over recent years. That what we have to do is to improve the electorate so that they vote the right way. I remember being at one think tank discussion in which a group of academics suggested that they would do a roadshow if there were other referendums in the future, and they'd go around and they actually said, talk to working men's clubs and talk in pubs, and we'll explain the evidence very simply so that people understand it, so that they can make an informed vote. And you knew what they were saying was, if only they'd understood the evidence and we'd explain it to them in, you know, 2 syllables, they might have voted the right way. And the point about democracy is that actually individuals are given the freedom to make decisions themselves, and we do not put any conditions on that. People are well-informed, ill-informed, also have qualifications, no qualifications, of all ages, all social backgrounds. And the one fantastic thing about democracy is at the ballot box, it doesn't matter whether you are a cleaner or whether you are a lord or whatever you are, you have equal rights at that ballot box. And we assume, and we are right to assume, that ordinary people are capable of making decisions about the future orientation of society, and that you don't need a PhD to do so. You don't need people with PhDs explaining how you should think in order to be able to vote. It's a very dangerous trend. The other thing is that we've actually taken to treating the electorate very much as a kind of knuckle-dragging mob. Think of some of the phrases that we've used. Deplorables, a basket full of deplorables, was the way that Hillary Clinton described voters in America. Here it's just become acceptable to describe people who voted leave as gammon, and a particularly insulting, dehumanizing way of describing them. And also to attribute to people the most malign and malevolent motivations. So it was said that people voted to leave the EU because they were racists, they hated immigrants, they didn't want anyone who wasn't white to be, and this was absolute nonsense. I mean, a third of the ethnic minorities in this country voted to leave the EU for a start off, and that was not what it was about. But the reason I'm mentioning it is not to rehearse the Brexit issue, but to draw your attention to a contemporary phenomenon which became clear to us in relation to how we've dealt with that Brexit vote, that we have, as a society, and particularly in respectable circles, decided that the electorate can't be trusted. They are not up to the job of getting the results which some people who seem to be very enlightened in the metropolitan elites have decided is the right result. And I find that very disconcerting and anti-democratic. The only other things that I want to do reflect on, and that's why I said that I have literally, we're being filmed outside of the House of Lords. I've just left the House of Lords. Ironically, even now, in the House of Lords, as we speak, there is a debate about the gains of Brexit. And the majority of the people in the House of Lords chamber are effectively saying it was a terrible mistake, terrible error, we shouldn't have done it, there are no gains, again, making the assumption that the electorate got it wrong. This is in a chamber that is not elected. I'm aware of the fact that I'm here talking about democracy and I'm not elected. A House of Lords that actually should be abolished. The truth is that a second chamber that's based on appointed members, it also contains bishops and hereditary lords, but most of us, me included, are appointed there by whichever political party decides that you merit getting there. It's completely unaccountable, and you have that position for life. And having been in the House of Lords, let me assure you that there's a huge amount of influence that the House of Lords has on legislation that's made. They aren't just there as a revising chamber, they actually have a big political impact on the decisions about what kind of laws we have in the country. That's very something that we should be very wary of. I'm now going off to a demonstration, 2 demonstrations in fact, outside the House of Lords, and one of them is about leaseholders who are being ripped off in a big scandal about cladding. Another is for the relatives of people in care homes. I'm going off on those demonstrations, and they won't be a mob. They won't be, I can hear them shouting now. They'll be noisy and rumbustious. And if you want to know what democracy is, it's about ordinary people making their voice heard at the ballot box, at demonstrations, which, by the way, this government are trying to curtail and ban. It's about basically us being equal and up to the task of deciding the future of society. So I look forward to explaining that in more depth and you giving me a grilling and asking me lots of questions when I see you, I think in November sometime. Good luck with your deliberations, and they will be deliberations, and whatever you think I'll be interested in. But let me assure you that a People's Assembly that discusses democracy is not democracy itself, it's just a small part of it. You won't be able to usurp real democracy, which is the thing that happens on the streets and at the ballot boxes.
So again, another very different perspective. We'll just give you that 1 minute to think, note down anything that you want to remember, you agree, you disagree, things that concern you, that you'll be able to take into your discussions.
Okay, so that's the second video. Let's move on now to our third presenter, and the third person is Willie Sullivan, who is the director of the Electoral Reform Society in Scotland, and he's a campaigner for democratic reform. So he argues that democracy is about sharing out power, and that the point of that is to ensure that the state acts in the interests of the people generally. And then he goes on to talk about various reforms that, in his view, should be made so that the democratic system in the UK comes closer to that ideal. So do listen out to various ideas that he comes up with. He ranges quite widely. And some of these, at least, are things that we'll be able to look at in greater depth at later weeks in the Assembly. So Juliet, over to you and to Willie Sullivan.
Hi, I'm Willie Sullivan from the Electoral Reform Society, and I just want to quickly share some
We're not seeing the video.
Yeah, Juliet, you might need to restart that.
It's also very quiet.
Yeah, some of them have been recorded a bit quiet. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do about that. Hopefully, once we do get to see the video, the subtitles will be there and we'll be able to play. So Juliet, can you try again?
Hi, I'm Willie Sullivan from the Electoral Reform Society, and I just want to quickly share some thoughts about democracy, because I know you're considering that in your Citizens' Assembly. So first of all, I'd like to say, let's ask the question, what is democracy? And often people think it is elections. You know, you go and vote, and then you get a representative, and that is democracy. But actually, that is just a system to try to arrive at democracy. And I would suggest that democracy is really about sharing out power across the country, so that the state, the country that we live in, and all the resources it has, from the army to the hospitals to all the money that it raises in taxes, is used for the interests of those people. So, because if we share out power, then there's lots of people saying, are you doing the right thing, holding the government to account, and questioning it, and making sure that the government and the politicians do use those resources in the interests of the people. So elections itself are not democracy. The sharing out of that power is democracy. And I think power is about the ability to stop bad things happening to you by the state or from elsewhere, and the ability to make good things. So, trying to get the state to behave in a way that is good for you and your families. And we have to ask the question, is the system working as it is at the moment? And I'd say probably not. Big indicators of that are climate change. We've not able to get the policy to address that, growing inequalities, and probably more importantly, well, not more important, these are vitally important, but just as important, or more of an indicator that democracy isn't working, is that people just don't trust it. On all the surveys, people are saying they don't trust the state to act in its interest, they don't trust politicians to act in their interests. So that mechanism that is supposed to make the state act in the interests of people isn't really working. So what can we do about it? I mean, we have the representative system. As I said, we vote for people to represent us, and we can make that better for sure. We can have an electoral system that makes sure that the number of MPs are much more in line with how people vote. We can change the House of Lords, which is largely appointed by the Prime Ministers of the day, and it even has hereditary peers in it. People are there because of their ancestors. And this would be important progress. I think also the fact that power is really centralised in this country, and we can see that in Northern Ireland and Wales and Scotland and other parts of England, people are not happy with that. It's too far away from them. And the way that Britain's currently made up, it's not able to deal with that. The democratic structures aren't working to make that properly. And you can see why, because the world has changed dramatically over only decades. Technology has shifted so much. The way we communicate with each other, the way we get news, the way we find out about the world is just so different. Yet our political system, bits of it are based hundreds of years ago, and it resists reform and update, where actually, when you think of the speed of society changing, it should be evolving all the time. And I think one of the process that you're involved in, the Citizens' Assembly, should be part of that system. We should have citizens' assemblies in every bit of local government, and some of them are looking at big issues like climate change, but they're kind of separate from the government, and I think there should be a way of building into it so that people, that there is ways of really sharing out power for people, and the way those big resources of the state are definitely working in their interests. Thanks.
Okay, so again, another perspective there, and we'll just take that minute of reflection before we move on to the next presentation.
Okay, so that was our third talk from Willie Sullivan. So next up, our fourth presentation is from Jonathan Sumption. And Jonathan Sumption was a judge on the Supreme Court. He's also a very serious thinker about democracy and how politics should work. If some of your listeners to BBC Radio 4, you might have heard him giving the Reith Lectures in 2019 on just this subject. So I think two main thoughts for you to look out for in his talk. One is he's arguing that there's a danger in democracies that majorities can ride roughshod over everyone else. And he argues that that could destroy democracy and we need to find ways to avoid it. And then secondly, towards the end of his talk, so he's another person who's quite skeptical of citizens' assemblies, but for very different reasons from Claire Fox. he doesn't really spell this out in full, but I think his argument is that you, as members of the Citizens' Assembly, have not been elected by the people at large, so why should the people at large listen to what you have to say? Now, I think there are things that could be said in response to that, and it's kind of tempting to say, but I'm going to resist the urge. The important thing is for you to listen to and reflect on what he says. So, Juliet, over to Jonathan Sumption.
Good day. My name is Jonathan Sumption. I used to be a judge of the Supreme Court, which is the nearest thing that the UK has to a constitutional court. But what I want to discuss with you today is the sort of questions that judges hardly ever ask themselves. What is a democracy? Why should we believe in it? How can we make it work or work better? Now, these are large questions, and I cannot claim to do more than suggest a few lines of thought. Democracy is a method of collective decision-making. It is not a set of values. It won't tell you what the answer is, but it might tell you how to find out the answer, or at least how to find out an answer that deserves to be accepted as the decision of our whole community. Individually, none of us counts for very much. We are just single grains of sand in a population of over 60 million. The case for democracy is essentially based on our moral and political equality. It gives each of us a tiny but equal voice in the choice of a government and, to some extent, of the policies for that government to adopt. The great problem about democracies is that they can so easily become the means by which majorities ride roughshod over the interests and opinions of the rest. That is how democracies fail. Most democracies do fail, and when they fail, they are almost always replaced by more or less authoritarian regimes. Democracy is an outstanding form of government for a free people, but it is also extraordinarily fragile. A free society comprises millions of individuals and groups with conflicting opinions and conflicting interests. In the nature of things, they are never going to agree about all that many things, and they are likely to disagree about some things of fundamental importance. The first task of any political system is to accommodate our differences and our interests so that we can continue to live together in a single political community without the systematic application of coercion. This is why the survival of any democracy depends on a culture of restraint. It depends on a general recognition that pushing the power of majorities too far is corrosive and fractures any political system, democracies most of all. In other words, it depends on a culture in which we all recognize that we cannot have everything that we want, however desirable and however morally right we may think it is, and even if there is majority support for it. Citizens' assemblies have been suggested as a way in which individuals can contribute to public decision-making directly through their deliberations and not just indirectly through the ballot box. It will only work if those who participate realize that they are not simply giving voice to their own preferences. Their conclusions have to be recognized as legitimate exercises of public power, even by those who disagree with them. That is a formidable challenge.
So again, we'll just take that moment to have that period of reflection before we move on to the next speaker, and again, a different perspective on what they believe is important and needs to be taken into consideration.
Okay, and now on to our final video. So this is from Jeremy Wright. He is a Conservative MP and he was a senior minister in the governments of David Cameron and Theresa May. And he's arguing essentially that we shouldn't underestimate the good qualities of the democracy that we already have. So he points out that power ultimately lies in the hands of the people in the system. He points out that governments with majority power are able to deliver on their manifestos. And he makes several other points that you'll want to listen out for as you hear him speaking. So he's not saying the current system is perfect, as you'll hear, but he does point out that in his view, it has many good features. I should also just mention he uses a couple of terms that some of you might not know. So he mentions that at one point that he was a government whip. Now, a whip is just a person who works for the government in Parliament in order to kind of manage the relationship between government and its own members of Parliament and encourage them to back the government's proposals when Parliament sits. So that's just what a whip is. And then he also mentions that he was the Attorney General. And again, the Attorney General is a member of the government, a government minister who's responsible for legal matters. So just so that you are aware of those terms. So this is Jeremy Wright. Juliet, over to him.
Hello, my name's Jeremy Wright, and I think I'd have to accept that as a Member of Parliament for 16 years, as a minister in the governments of David Cameron and then Theresa May, and as a candidate in 5 general elections, I have what you might call an insider's view of our democratic system. But I wanted to just take a few minutes to talk about, among all the many things you'll be considering as features of a good democratic system, what I think are particularly important features. And really there are 2 for me. First of all, that in the end, ultimately, power lies in the hands of the people, of the electorate. And secondly, that our democratic system produces a government that can do what it says it will do. Now, our democracy is not perfect. I don't think any system of human government is likely to be. But I think it does pretty well in meeting those tests. And I want to just briefly explain why. Now, the first thing any democracy needs is free and fair elections, so the electorate can make a genuine choice. And I think certainly by international comparisons, we do pretty well in that regard. But that choice needs to be an informed choice, and we achieve that by parties setting out in manifestos what they will do so that you know what you're getting if you vote for them. But the system also needs to be capable of producing governments capable of implementing that manifesto with a majority in the House of Commons to allow them to do so. And again, our elections generally deliver that. But it also means that parties have to have a way of ensuring that their members of Parliament keep to the promises that they've made. Now, government whips, and I used to be one, get a bad reputation. But the truth is that without them, it would be really hard to make sure that individual members of Parliament keep to the promises they made in their manifestos. Now, of course, not every political issue features in a manifesto, and in the ones that don't, members of Parliament have to use their best judgment and then be assessed by the electorate as to how well they've done so at election time. And there are also political issues that are just so big that they need handling in a different way. Issues that are not just about how the government uses the power the electorate has given it, or rather lent it at an election, but really about the nature of that power itself, issues of sovereignty. And it seems to me that both government and Parliament should not decide to change that sovereignty without specifically asking permission from the people first. And that's really what we use referendums for. Whether they're about dividing our sovereignty when considering the independence of different parts of the UK, for example, or about pooling our sovereignty in institutions like the European Union. But if we don't want to have a few referendums every week, and I certainly don't recommend it, then inevitably the government will be making decisions on our behalf on a regular basis. And ultimately, if we don't like the way they do it, we can get rid of them at the next election. But between elections, governments don't and shouldn't exercise power without restriction. And I want to identify a couple. So there is, of course, the scrutiny of the press. And in this country, we're lucky to have a robust, independent, dynamic press that holds politicians to account. Beyond that, there's public pressure from individual constituents or from organized campaign groups, and the internet has made them ever more effective in doing what they do. And also, as you'd expect a former Attorney General to say, we have, importantly, the rule of law. The courts are there to make sure that governments do not behave unreasonably and that they do not break their own laws. But in the end, I come back to the two fundamental things that I think really matter. First, that ultimate power lies in the hands of the people, and that means that decisions should be taken by the institutions the people control. In the end, you can get rid of governments and parliaments you don't like. You can't do that with judges or with journalists. And the second principle, that the system has to allow governments to do what they say they will, which doesn't mean everybody gets what they want. It doesn't mean that everybody agrees on what should be done. And I suspect the next few weeks will make that clear to you if you didn't think it already. But don't underestimate the value of a government with a majority of elected members of parliament and the power to make change. You're being asked to think about how to design a better democracy, a democracy that works well. And democracy shouldn't be seen as an academic exercise. It should be a system of government that preserve, protect, and enhance the lives of its citizens. And a system of democracy that looks great on paper and works well in theory doesn't protect or enhance anyone's rights, doesn't make anyone better off, and doesn't make our country stronger in any way unless it works in practice. And it's that I invite you to consider as you have what I know will be fascinating conversations about the way in which our democracy can change. And of course it can change and improve, but let's not lose sight of how to make it work, not just look good on paper. Thank you very much.
So again, another perspective there. We'll just take that 1 minute to give you a chance to sort of absorb that and note down anything that stuck out to you from that presentation. Okay, we are going to go for a short break in a moment. I've posted.
Can't hear you, Kayla.
Thank you, mute myself. Right, we are going to go for a short break. But just before we go for a break, let me just tell you a couple of things. I've just posted in the chat, it's the link to the speaker information sheet. You were sent it in advance of the weekend, but now if you do want to look back and just kind of remind yourself of who any of the different speakers that we've heard from this morning are, that should give you a bit more information about them. We are going to go for a break, just a 5-minute break this morning if we can. And when you come back from the break, you'll be we will have opened up the breakout rooms. So you'll be in your breakout room ready to start. And really what we're asking you to think about is there's been lots of different perspectives, lots of different ideas about what makes a good democracy that have started to come out both yesterday and again this morning from the advocates that we've heard from. So we really want you to think, again, it is that big question about what would a good democracy look like? But today, to move from thinking about some of the you talked about some of the likes and dislikes, you talked about some of the sort of features that should be in there, but really start thinking now, well, what are these underlying principles? What are the underlying things that are valuable and important for shaping a good democracy? So I'm going to leave it there. Do go and have a 5-minute break. And when you reconvene, you'll be in your breakout groups for most of the rest of the morning. And we'll see you after that. And this looks like, yeah, this looks like everyone's coming back into the main room. So congratulations, everyone. We've got to the end of the first weekend. Hopefully you've enjoyed the conversations. I know there's been a lot to sort of think about. I know you've heard from a lot of different people, a lot of different perspectives. And really this weekend was about opening it up, starting to think, well, what are we really talking about when we talk about democracy? What do we actually really mean? What are the things that are the values, the principles, the features of what makes a good democracy? When we come back together next time, we're going to be sort of taking some of those values, principles, some of the considerations that you've been discussing today, and thinking, well, how does that really play out in terms of how, you know, the institutions within our democracy work, but also thinking about, well, you know, in a good democracy, what should and should not a democratically elected government be able to do, and what should they not be able to do? So that's where we're going with it. That'll be our next steps. And then we'll start getting into some of the more specifics and working towards thinking, well, what does this mean for the type of recommendations that we might be wanting to make? Before we finish up today, I'm just going to hand back to Alan, who has a couple of things he wants to let you know about, things that are happening around the Assembly that you hopefully will be involved in.
Thanks very much, Kayla. Just a couple of quick things from me. Firstly, in a few minutes' time, you will be getting an email in your inboxes, which, among other things, will have a link to a survey for you to complete about this weekend of the Citizens' Assembly, and ask a few other questions about your views as well. So that's partly there just so that we know how this weekend of the Assembly has gone, and if there are any things that we can do to improve your experience of the Assembly, then you can let us know through that survey. And it's partly also there because it's part of our research on citizens' assemblies and the processes of citizens' assemblies. So I think you've seen from the discussions that we've had this morning and some of the presentations that, you know, there are lots of debates about citizens' assemblies and whether they're a useful part of democracy or not. So we're doing this research in order to understand that better. So if you're able just to follow that link, and really quickly, it shouldn't take you too long to fill in that survey, that would be really helpful for us for doing our research. And then secondly, so we're planning to have a few kind of informal evening chats over the next few weeks between now and the next meeting of the Assembly. So in normal non-COVID times, if we're doing a citizens' assembly, we would be meeting in person. We would be gathering together for a weekend at a hotel, and we would have the chance to get to know each other over the coffee breaks and over the meals and things like that. And we can't do that at the moment because of the COVID situation. And, you know, there are some advantages to that. It means that people from all across the country can get together really easily, but there are also some disadvantages. So that chance just to get to know each other, we don't manage that to quite the same degree. And that's a shame for you. You don't get to know each other as well as you could do. And it's also a shame for us. So, you know, when I'm speaking to MPs and people like that after the Assembly, persuading them that they should listen to what you've said, it's really helpful if I just know who you are. And what your lives are like. So the plan is that we will hold a few chats between now and then. So in a few days' time, you'll get some details of times when you can sign up to take part in one of these chats. It'll be really informal. We won't be talking about democracy. We'll just be talking about life and what's happening in our own lives, that kind of thing. It's not compulsory, but I very much hope lots of you will want to take part in one of those chats just to get to know each other better. And the final word from me is just to reiterate what Kayla said. Congratulations. You've been working very hard throughout the weekend, and I know you've all been doing fantastic, fantastic work. And I look forward very much to seeing you again in 3 weeks' time. So thank you from me, and I think back to Kayla for the very final word.
Again, it is just thank you. We really do commit to finishing on time. So I am going to say this is the meeting finished. If go enjoy your Sunday afternoon. If anyone does have a sort of question or something they want to discuss with us before they go, you can stay on the line for a few minutes. But for the rest of you, thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And we'll see you soon.